The night it started, the city smelled like wet pennies and second chances, and Maya should have known that nothing good ever blooms from a promise made in the rain. Thunder whipped over the glass skyline, turning the financial district into a trembling mirror. She watched her own reflection fracture in the lobby doors of Argent and Ash while she waited for the last elevator, a paper cup of coffee turning cold in her hands. The power flickered twice, long enough for Maya to see her face without pretense. Tired, beautiful in an easy way she didn't trust, and stretched thin by 9 years of marriage to Leo that had settled into a quiet, polite weather report. Overcast, light winds, unseasonably cool. She told herself she loved stability until she woke some mornings and discovered that stability had quietly salted the soil where her wonder used to grow. That night, she was running the quarterly risk forecast for a client that had become a rumor, then a menace, Thorn Capital, a hurricane with a business card. When the CEO, Adrian Thorne, stepped out of the conference room he used like a private sky. His tie was loosened, his shirt sleeves pushed up, and there was rainwater in his hair that looked deliberate, like the city itself had slicked him with approval. His gaze hit her like a split-second power outage, and when the lights returned, the room wasn't rearranged so much as redecided. Maya, he said, and he said her name like it belonged to his mouth. The liquidity stress tests, are you really doing them alone? She swallowed hard enough to taste copper. My team's out, I volunteered. His smile was a slow strike of a match. I'm not surprised. He walked closer, and she could smell petrichor and a cologne that made her think of dark aviation leather and something warm enough to climb into. He stood beside her screen and didn't bother pretending to scan the numbers. He always had people to pretend for him. You once told the board that fear is just urgency wearing a costume, he said softly. I think about that more than I should. She hadn't remembered saying it. She remembered the meeting, the long table, the sound of her pulse like a second hand, the way Leo's text arrived right before she spoke. Forget dinner, babe. My mom's favorite, like a rescue rope she refused to take. She remembered the way Adrian watched her argue risk like it was a religion with a private language. She remembered later in the elevator, laughing alone at nothing, or at the idea of being the kind of woman who laughed when nothing was funny. Now, Adrian watched her like the rain made him honest. Walk with me, he said. They passed empty desks, the ghosted shapes of people who had dreams and dental insurance. They moved through the office like reluctant conspirators. In the glass corridor above the trading floor, the city spread below like a jeweled bruise. You're underpaid, he said without preamble, and overmannered, she huffed a laugh. That your official performance review. That's me trying not to say the thing I shouldn't say. He stopped in front of the storm-black windows. His reflection looked like a man reconsidering his own gravity. Maya, I could build an empire with you. I could build a better one. He said it like a promise and a dare, and her heart did the humiliating thing it did at Cliff's. It looked down and imagined flying. She thought of Leo, of his sunflower-sincere hands and his habit of tucking a note in her purse before big meetings. You don't need luck, you are the lucky thing, love, L. She thought of their kitchen table with the one squeaky chair, the chipped mug with a galaxy inside, the life they had made by choosing each other on average days. And she thought of how long it had been since someone saw her not as dependable, but as hungry. The storm threw a white blade across the sky, and the office went briefly dark. When the generators sighed awake, Adrian was closer. We could be reckless just once, he said, like it was a kindness. And then we'll be better for it. She didn't kiss him, not then. She did something worse, she didn't step back. The city pressed its face to the glass and watched them decide to become people who kept secrets. On the way out, he brushed her wrist as if testing whether she burned. Tomorrow, he said, come early. On the train home, she listened to the rain and the announcements, and the part of her soul that had been sleeping like a cat on a radiator wake up and stretch. Leo was sitting cross-legged on the floor when she arrived, printing photos for the wall they kept promising to curate. Sunsets, terrible selfies, one where her hair had gone rogue in the wind on Coney Island. He looked up with that boyish, sideways smile that had survived mortgage rates, hand-me-down furniture, and the disappointment of 2 lines on a stick that never came. You're late, he said gently. I saved you the last slice. Maya kissed the top of his head and tasted the soft terror of being loved by someone who believed in her goodness. She went to the bathroom and stared at herself until her face stopped being a face and became a decision. She thought of tomorrow and all the tomorrows that would rearrange themselves around one word. Yes. Then she slid down the door and cried silently, because sometimes grief shows up before the death notices. When she finally slept, she dreamed of water rising through hallways, of elevators like coffins, and of a single text arriving at 6:03 am. You don't have to be good to be mine. She woke before dawn, the city already arguing with itself, and she knew two things. She would go early, and there would be no forgetting afterward. She put on the blue blouse Leo loved. She didn't know why she did that, which is to say, she did. The elevator blinked open into an office that wasn't empty. Alina from compliance stood by the filing cabinets, the whites of her eyes catching the glass blue light. She watched Maya the way a key watches a lock. Big day? Alina asked casually, but the question was loaded like a suitcase she would not unpack. Maya smiled too brightly. Always. When Adrian's office door clicked open behind her without a knock, Maya didn't turn immediately. She let the new shape of the morning settle around her like a dress bought too tight. Then she turned, and for the first time, the rain made a promise it intended to keep. By the time a rumor learns to walk, it already knows its mother's name. Alina never said anything outright. She didn't have to. Her silence was a trained animal, sitting and shaking on command in every meeting Maya entered. The air in Argent and Ash grew crowded with unsent emails and glances that snipped like scissors. If cruelty had a scent, it would be the lemon disinfectant of a conference room after a scandal. Maya had not planned for the affair to feel like a rehearsal for the rest of her life, but routines grow in any light. Early mornings. A coffee left on her desk, a note in Adrian's slanted print, Esker von Yield looks like a lie we can make true. Late nights. A door clicking shut, a desk too clean, a breath between them like a consent form neither of them read. She kept saying she should stop, and then she kept not stopping. Self-betrayal is so often a matter of calendar invites. At home, Leo began speaking into the space that opened whenever she left a room. He filled it with recipes, with a new Spotify playlist, with a paint swatch called Golden Hour he held up against the living room wall like hope on sale. We could move the couch, he said, and she could hear the quiet, aching parenthesis. We could move the couch and not the marriage. She wanted to tell him everything and also nothing, both at once, a kind of honesty shaped like a trapdoor. When the first text from Adrian arrived while Leo was slicing mangoes, tonight, the floor is ours. Maya's heart dropped the way lifts do when someone hits stop between floors. She put her phone face down and smiled at Leo's soft swearing when the mango juice ran to his elbows. Hold on, she said, and she took a dish towel and washed his hands the way she wished someone would wash her soul. Stay in tonight, he said, reading her, or reading the shape she made when she lied. Let me be selfish. The problem with adultery is that it's a math problem disguised as poetry. Eventually, the numbers pin you to a whiteboard. Maya told him the half-truth that hurts less. I can't. He nodded too quickly, which is the speed of a heart that learned once, ages ago, not to ask the second question. At work, the numbers began humming in a key no one wanted to hear. The Thorn Capital file deepened into something gulleted and sleek. Alina's team produced a memo that used words like exposure and opacity, and concluded with a paragraph that smelled like a fire alarm. This is not risk, Alina told a room that tried not to look at Maya. This is appetite, and appetite eats everything. Adrian listened with his hands steepled and his mouth quirked as if tasting a lemon he'd ordered on purpose. When they broke, he stood too close at the window and said, I won't lose sleep over paperwork stamped with fear. I hired you to measure thunder without hiding from it. The first time he touched Maya's wrist and she didn't move, she thought, I am stepping away from the man who would sit with me through jury duty and a food poisoning episode and think I'm funny while I'm dying. The second time she thought nothing. By the third she thought I should be punished. The punishment came as whispers that followed her down the hallway, sticky as static. She's so calm, someone said near the copier. Guilty people often are, Alina replied, without looking up. The day the office learned to talk about Maya without using her name, Leo called to ask an impossible question in a simple voice. Are we okay? She opened her mouth and felt every soft thing inside her retreat. We're busy, she said. He laughed, small and lonely. Busy isn't a feeling. That night, the city pulled its skirt of fog to its knees, and Maya walked into Adrian's office knowing she was choosing a ghost version of herself and preferring it. Tell me to stop, she said, pressing her forehead to his chest like a confession without a priest. Tell me I'm ruining the best thing I ever had. He held her face like a fragile verdict. You're not ruining anything that wasn't already starving, he murmured. When the knock came, always there is a knock, Maya's spine went cold. A junior analyst named Priya stood in the doorway with a folder that could have been anything except innocence. She took in the tableau with eyes that formed a sentence behind her face and filed it like evidence. She left without closing the door, and the draft that curled into the room was shame, wearing expensive shoes. This will blow over, Adrian said, because men like him believe in their own weather. Not everything will, Maya said, surprising herself with the clarity of it. She went home and sat on the floor of the shower until the water ran cold and her fingers wrinkled with penance. Leo knocked softly on the bathroom door. "Do you want tea?" he asked, practicing loving her even in ignorance. She cried into a towel because no was not the right answer to a man offering warmth. The next morning, HR asked Maya to give a training on conflict of interest, as if the universe had hired a comedian. She stood in front of a room of faces that clutched their judgments in their laps like handbags. She spoke about ethics the way one speaks about weather patterns, distant, statistical, inevitable. When it was over, Alina approached, her voice gentled by something that might have been pity or victory. "We all want to believe the river is ours to command," she said quietly. "The flood remembers otherwise." Maya walked back to her desk and found a printed photo tucked beneath her keyboard. Her at the window of Adrian's office, his hand on her wrist, their bodies arranged like a rumor that learned to spell. No note, no caption, just a timeline that had begun cutting itself into bone. Her phone buzzed, a blocked number. "Tell your husband before someone else does." She stared at the words until they blurred, and when she could see again, she knew two things with a surgeon's certainty. Alina hadn't sent it, and Adrian would tell her to do nothing. She forwarded the text to herself, then to no one. That night, Leo was waiting at the table with a photo album she didn't know he had kept. The one with the Polaroid from their first apartment, the hallway plant that died within hours, the landlady's stenciled cat named Business. He held up a picture of Maya with her eyes closed, head thrown back at a joke he must have told. "I didn't realize how little we've taken pictures lately," he said softly. "It's like we lost a witness," she almost told him then. She almost took her life by the shoulders and shook it awake. But she didn't, because fear dresses like mercy when it's tired. She said, "Let's take one now." They posed, foreheads touching, the timer blinking like a countdown to a different kind of bomb. The camera clicked. Somewhere between the flash and the whir, her phone chimed with a new message. "Tomorrow, 6 p.m. rooftop, or I send it." Maya's mouth went dry, and in the photo, the last of her old life smiled like it meant it. The rooftop above Argent and Ash had always looked like an idea a poet had about the sky. Gravel and glass, wind that came with its own opinions. At 5:59, Maya stepped into the blue hour and found not one person but two. Priya, the analyst with the folder, and a man whose face was unremarkable in a way that suggested professional effort. He wore a jacket that cost too much to be anonymous and smiled without using his eyes. "Thank you for being punctual," he said. "It tells me you understand the value of time." He set a phone on the wall and clicked a video. Maya and Adrian, a loop of something that had felt private enough to be holy and now looked like B-roll. "This can live or die," he said lightly. "It's hungry. What do you want?" Maya asked, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Priya's hands shook around the folder. She looked like someone who had told herself for 3 days that right was a luxury. "This is bigger than sex," the man said, bored now that the shock had done its work. "Thorn Capital is a story that writes itself. It just needs a chorus." He slid a sheet toward Maya. "Move the risk rating 1 notch. A whisper will become a headline." Maya stared at the paper and felt the years of her career line up behind her like witnesses, every model she had built, every night she ate at her desk, every win that had tasted like solitude. She thought of Alina's memo, of exposure and appetite, and of Adrian's mouth forming the word fear like it was an arithmetic error. She saw the corridor of outcomes, all of them ugly. Obey and poison a city with the shine of a lie. Refuse and watch her private ruin become public entertainment. "You know this is illegal," she said. The man's smile widened incrementally, as if he had been built to enjoy that line. "Lots of things are illegal," he said. "But only a few are inevitable." He gestured to the skyline. "Stakes make heroes or headlines, sometimes both." Priya met Maya's eyes and flinched. "I didn't want," she whispered. "He said it would be cleaner if you just nudged it." The man rolled his eyes, finally irritated. "This is not a morality play," he said. It's a memo. Maya took a breath so deep it scraped. She pictured Leo's mango-sticky elbows, the squeaky chair, the Polaroid of her laughing without proof. She pictured a city that would wear whatever crown you gave it and thought about what kind of queen she was willing to be. No, she said. Send it if you have to, but I won't burn a neighborhood to save a marriage I already set on fire. The man's expression didn't change. He was the sort who only practiced two faces because he rarely needed a third. That's noble, he said, and nobility is wildly overrated in markets. He pocketed the phone. See you in the papers. He left and Priya left, and Maya stood alone in a wind that had a lesson and didn't care if she learned it. She texted Adrian, "Problem, we're exposed." He replied within seconds, "Handle it. This is why I need you." She looked at the words until the verb need shrank to its proper size. Then she called Leo and did not practice. When he answered, she said, "I need you to meet me at home. Please." She prepared a confessional that sounded almost righteous in her head and sinister out loud. When Leo walked in, he smelled like rain and basil. He had brought her a plant without meaning to. She told him everything, not like a flood, more like a slow, terrible tide that keeps finding new shore. She did not say she loved Adrian. She did not say she did not. She said, "I don't know who I am when I'm with him, and I don't know if I like her." Leo sat very still. People always talk about the anger of the betrayed and not the grief, because anger photographs better. His face moved through seasons: disbelief, humiliation, winter. "How long?" he asked, and when she told him, something in him made a small sound like a ship rope straining. "Did you ever think about me while you were?" He didn't finish. "I thought about you constantly," she said, which was the truth and also its own cruelty. He laughed, one sharp bark. "That's worse." He stood, then sat, then stood again because sometimes the body can't find a position that hurts less. "Did you love me?" he asked finally, past tense like a mercy. "I do," she said, and they both heard the verb tense malfunction. He nodded like a judge acknowledging a technicality. "You have to quit," he said. "You have to stop seeing him." "There's more," she said, because the truth is a nesting doll. She told him about the video and the demand. He went very quiet, the kind of quiet that breaks microphones. "So it's not just us," he said. "It's your name, your work." "It's the firm," she said. He nodded again, and this time the nod meant, "I will help you even though you made me the fool in a story where I wanted to be the chorus." "We go to compliance," he said, surprising them both. "We tell Alina everything." Maya stared at him and felt the ache of loving a man who still reached for the ethical rail in a burning building. "She hates me," Maya said, and it sounded like a prayer. "Good," he replied. "Then she'll be honest." They went together in the morning, hands not touching because some intimacies cannot survive fluorescent light. Alina listened with her hands folded and her eyes on Maya's face, the way one reads a confession to see if the soul fits. When Maya finished, Alina was silent long enough to make a point. "You should have told me the minute you buried the first landmine," she said at last. "But here we are, on a field we didn't choose." "What do we do?" Leo asked, a plural that made Maya cry later in an empty stairwell. Alina slid a folder across the table. "We document," she said. "We isolate systems access, flag any changes to risk ratings, inform legal, and prepare for the kind of weather that names itself." She looked at Maya. "You resign today?" "I already did," Maya said softly. Alina's mouth twitched toward respect and then away. "Good," she stood. "One more thing, if that video surfaces, your husband and your firm aren't the only ones injured." She didn't say Adrian's name, which was its own indictment. "Do not contact him." Maya nodded, and then of course she did. She texted, "I told Leo. Compliance is involved, protect yourself." No reply. Hours later, a push alert lit her phone with a headline that made her sit down on the nearest curb. "THORNE Capital founder under investigation. Office raided. Source CLAIMS risk manipulation." For a moment, the world went very quiet except for the sound of her heart making a new shape. Leo called. "Come home," he said. She stood on a city that was suddenly made of glass and consequence, and for the first time in months, she knew where home was. She walked in, and he was on the floor with a cardboard box he had labeled with a black marker, "The Good Things." He looked up and asked a question that threw a cliff at her feet. "Do we try again, or do we end this gently?" Before she could answer, the doorbell rang. On the other side, the past adjusted its tie and smiled for the camera. Adrian stood at the door like he'd invented knocking and wanted credit. He had the look of a man whose house was on fire and who still believed charm could negotiate with flames. Leo didn't move. He had never met Adrian in person, and now the world had arranged a blind date between hatred and restraint. I need 5 minutes, Adrian said to the space between them. No, Leo said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Some no's arrive at the correct altitude on their own. Adrian looked at Maya, and for the first time since she met him, he looked unsure enough to pass for human. They took the servers, he said. They'll find everything. He ran a hand through his hair. The video, if it comes out, I can make it disappear. You can't make anything disappear, Maya said, and she heard how tired she sounded, like a door someone kept closing softly. Not me, not this. He stepped closer, and Leo took one step forward without thinking. Men are territorial even when the territory is regret. Don't, Leo said. Not one step. Adrian stopped. He looked at the box on the floor, the good things, and something moved behind his eyes like envy with a map. I didn't plan for any of this, he said, a sentence men like him deploy when the horizon refuses to obey. No one plans their favorite disaster, Leo replied. What do you want, Adrian? Maya asked, because what we want is always the real confession. He exhaled. I want you to say I wasn't just a symptom, he said. I want you to say I was a choice. She felt a sting of compassion and let it pass. Compassion had been her gateway drug. You were a choice, she said, and so is this. She took Leo's hand without asking if it was okay, because some answers must be tested like ice. Adrian swallowed regret like it was a pill with a rough edge. Then good luck, he said, but he meant something more complicated and more bitter. He left, and the room felt larger, not lighter but accurate. Maya leaned against the door and cried a clean cry, the kind that comes after someone finally uses the correct word for a wound. The video surfaced 2 days later on a gossip site that used the word exclusive like a birthright. It was blurred enough to be deniable and clear enough to ruin a week. Argent and Ash issued a statement. Thorn Capital issued 3. Alina texted a single line, brace. Maya did not read comments. That way lies a parliament of strangers arguing with your skin. She watered the basil plant and made toast for Leo, and then let herself want forgiveness without attempting to earn it all at once. They started therapy on a Tuesday, because that's when the world chooses to be practical. The therapist had soft shoes and a way of asking questions that made them both feel like furniture that could be rearranged without breaking. What did the affair give you that the marriage did not? She asked Maya. Permission, Maya said before she could lie. To be hungry, to be disastrous. The therapist nodded like a metronome. And what do you need from Leo to be hungry and disastrous here? Maya looked at Leo and said, for you to stop treating me like a fragile museum piece and more like a storm you want to go out in. He blushed. I can do that, he said, then looked at her with a fierceness that had not had space to stretch in years. In private, Leo asked harder questions he couldn't bring to a room with a box of tissues. Were you happy? He asked one night in the dark. Sometimes, she said, but mostly I was terrified I would never find my way back to myself. He exhaled into her hair. And now? Now I'm here, she said. And I want to be chosen every morning, not because we promised once, but because we promise again. There was no montage. Healing was not cinematic. It was a calendar with little green checks and some days left blank. They learned new habits, telling the truth while it was still unflattering and small, texting each other the mundane details that form intimacy's scaffolding, letting silence be a room, not a verdict. She sent Alina a handwritten note that said, I'm sorry I made your job harder. Thank you for making mine easier by telling the truth. Alina replied with a typed card, don't mistake consequences for cruelty. You did one brave thing, do another. Maya took a job at a nonprofit that audited municipal bonds. The office smelled like printer ink and banana bread. She made less money and more sense. Sometimes she missed the high wire of Argent and Ash like one misses a nightmare that came with a beautiful view. She kept the Polaroid on her desk, the one taken the night before the rooftop, her eyes soft with lies she no longer owed. When people asked, she said, that's a before. Adrian sent one email from a new address months later. We could have built an empire. She wrote back, I'm building a home. He did not reply. One evening, a storm rolled in, the kind that remembers how to be theatrical. The city flashed its bones. The power blinked. For a half-second, the apartment was all silhouette and promise. Maya and Leo stood at the window with mugs of tea and watched their faces reflected side by side like a treaty. Do you ever wonder? He began, then stopped. Every day, she said, but wondering isn't wanting. He turned to her. Let's repaint the living room, he said suddenly, and she laughed. Golden hour? No, he said, kissing her shoulder. Thunderhead, she grinned into his neck. Dramatic, honest, he said. As they moved the couch, the squeaky chair complaining like tradition, Maya found the note Leo had once tucked under the cushion years ago. You don't need luck, you are the lucky thing. She handed it to him, and he smiled the smile that had survived empires and headlines. We keep this, he said, even if we're different people now. Especially if, she said. Later, in bed, lightning whispered along the skyline, and Maya closed her eyes and saw not a corridor of outcomes, but a room with 2 chairs and no traps. She thought of the version of herself that had stepped into rain and called it absolution. She sent that girl love and a map. Hey, Leo murmured. What? Take a picture tomorrow, he said. Let's be our own witnesses again. Maya smiled into the dark. She thought of all the places a heart can break and all the places it can be put back, imperfect and strong. In the morning, she would make coffee and toast, and they would stand too close to fit entirely in the frame, and that would be the point. Outside, the storm eased into a steady rain, and for once the rain was just weather.